Hello, I'm Asif Farouk of Finextra, and I'm here today with Alistair Milne from the University of Loughborough and Malcolm Chisholm, president of AskGet.com Incorporated. And we're going to be talking about a paper they've co-written for the Swift Institute entitled A Prospect for Common Financial Language in Wholesale Financial Services. So Alistair, I'll begin with you. Why was this research actually commissioned?
Well, there's a tremendous interest in this idea of common financial language. It really came out of the financial crisis, the failure of Lehman Brothers. People suddenly realised that companies around the world had no real idea of what their exposures were, and they had no way of communicating to regulators because of different definitions. The data was disorganised. They couldn't say exactly what their they couldn't say exactly how much their exposure was. So the notion of a common financial language was suggested in a speech by Andy Haldane, who's now chief economist at the Bank of England, and he suggested that with a common financial language, certainly legal entity identifiers, which he described as the nouns of a common financial language, and further constructs, instrument identifiers, then we could very and quickly, easily discover what exposures were, and that would help us avert a crisis and deal with the crisis should one happen again.
And Malcolm, can you provide us some highlights from this research, and was there anything that surprised you?
Yes, I think the thing that I found surprising was that although we're looking at this from the context of a common financial language, it really emerged that you need to consider different communities of interest, each with their own little perspectives on the common financial language. So I think that although it's quite valid to say that if we use particular terms, they should all have definitions that are the same by everybody who uses them. Nevertheless, when you come to different jurisdictions, different markets, even different areas within the same company, people's area of interest becomes a lot more detailed and a lot more specific, and that has to be taken into account. So, for instance, different regulators in different jurisdictions will have particular concerns that other regulators in other jurisdictions simply don't. And so for them, those concepts that apply to one regulator do not apply to another one. Secondly, some markets have certain kinds of financial transactions that are simply missing from other markets, and for them it's not a concern. And then there are, even within an individual company, issues about how you might think of something. For instance, a mortgage loan is thought of in one way in loan application, loan generation, versus another way when we come to securitize it and bundle it up into a bond and sell it. So in the application process, there'll be all kinds of attributes of the loan that matter for the application, which are no longer applicable in servicing or anything downstream like securitization. In securitization, there'll be all kinds of concepts that are utterly irrelevant to loan origination.
And Alistair, was there anything that surprised you in the research?
I think a second highlight for us was our realization that this simple idea, attractive, of nouns and verbs that would describe the financial universe, has to take account of there is really no single unchanging financial reality. So the things we're trying to describe, they vary from place to place, from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and they also evolve over time.
And Malcolm, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I think so. Although we've been talking about a common financial language, there is an issue when you start with business discourse and translate it into data in a database. And of course, today, what the regulators are interested in is data. That's what they will have to aggregate, sort through, search for, whatever it is they need to search for. When you design a database, you have trade-offs between the semantics of the business discourse and things like maintaining data quality or optimizing data storage, or ease of programming, or speed of development. And those then tend to, quite frankly, bend the language, as it were, out of shape and make it fit the database, especially when you hand over from business knowledgeable people to really technicians, techies, as it were. Not to disparage that, but that's the way it is. And what you need then, and we showed this in figure 2 in our paper, is a semantic adapter, which is a translator that translates back from the database to the at least part of the common financial language that that database is trying to represent. And I think the regulators need to understand that, because they will need that if they're to take data from a wide range of institutions, and they're then trying to aggregate it together in a database that they control to do their work. And so I think that's an important part of this too. So yes, it's as we've discussed, there's a lot of issues about language, but data also comes into this.
So we've looked at a number of case studies of developers of standards and language, but I think the one I'd highlight actually is ISO 20022. Now, obviously the scope of that is more limited. It's about developing standards for payments and settlement systems. But I think the valuable aspect of ISO 20022 from our perspective is the layering that's involved. There's a separation between the actual message structures, the syntax of messaging, and then the business process, and making sure that there's what ISO 22 provides a reference dictionary to ensure that the actual business aspects are understood from a common perspective. The actual choice of messaging could be XML, but for systems reasons, somebody might be preferring to stick to something that was a little older. And that sort of approach it's a good illustration of the need for piecemeal development of common financial language.
So, Alistair, can you provide a overview on the conclusions of your research?
Well, I think our broader conclusion is that while we welcome the idea of a common financial language, this isn't going to be a single linguistic revolution where somebody comes up with a dictionary and then we all use that. This is going to be a process of evolution, of greater commonality of language, and it's going to be, frankly, a matter of decades to make all the progress that the regulators would like to see.